The cafe was buzzing with the morning rush when it happened. Steam hissed from the espresso machine, the scent of freshly baked croissants filled the air, and the line of customers stretched almost to the door. I was sliding a cappuccino across the counter when his voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "You're fired, Mia." The world seemed to still around me. My husband Ethan stood tall in his pressed shirt and smug smile, his voice deliberately loud enough for every customer and employee to hear. "This is my company. Now?" He added, his tone dripping with ownership. My hands froze mid-motion, porcelain cup trembling ever so slightly. Around us, the cafe staff stared wide-eyed, their knuckles white around steaming milk pitchers and pastry tongs. He thought he'd humiliated me. He thought he'd broken me. But as the room fell silent, I folded my apron neatly, placed it on the counter, and slipped a slim envelope into my bag, my secret weapon. My voice stayed calm, almost too calm, when I said, "Good luck with that, Ethan. I should back up." That morning started like any other. The alarm had buzzed at 5:30 a.m., and I rolled out of bed with the ease of habit, stretching my stiff back before heading to the kitchen. Ethan was already gone, which wasn't unusual these days. He liked to arrive early, claiming it gave him time to strategize, though I knew it really meant sitting in the office upstairs, scrolling through his phone while I handled opening prep. The streets were still gray when I reached the cafe. The smell of roasted beans hit me as soon as I unlocked the door, a familiar comfort that had once felt like the heartbeat of our shared dream. I moved quickly, lights on ovens, warming trays of pastries arranged just so. Haley, one of our baristas, arrived moments later, her cheerful morning boss making me smile. She'd been with us since the beginning, loyal, hardworking, and blissfully unaware of the cracks spreading through my marriage. The first customers trickled in by 7. I thrived in those hours. The rush, the rhythm, the endless ballet of brewing, pouring, serving, smiling. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Or at least, I thought it was. I noticed Ethan arrive around 8:30. He strode in like a CEO walking onto a stage, his new leather shoes clicking against the worn floorboards we'd once scrubbed together. He didn't head upstairs as usual. Instead, he lingered near the counter, hands clasped behind his back, scanning the room like a general surveying his troops. I caught his eye. "Everything okay?" I asked, wiping my hands on a towel. His lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, everything's fine. Better than fine, actually." Something in my chest tightened. Then came the moment he raised his voice, deliberately projecting across the cafe. "Mia, you're done here. You're fired." Haley nearly dropped the steaming pitcher in her hands. Marco, our roaster, stopped mid-sentence with a customer. Even the espresso machine seemed to hiss louder, punctuating his words. I blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me." He stepped closer, straightening his tie. "You're not needed anymore. This business needs real leadership, and frankly, you've been holding it back. From this moment on, I'm taking over. You can collect a severance and find something else to do." The room spun slightly, but not from shock. No. The shock had burned out months ago, replaced by a simmering awareness that this day might come. Ethan had been preparing for it, his arrogance swelling with each passing week. I looked at the faces around me. Haley's confusion, Marco's clenched jaw, the customers whispering. I thought about the years of sweat poured into these walls, the countless nights I'd stayed late balancing the books, the weekends sacrificed, the dreams we'd built, bean by bean, cup by cup. And I thought about the paperwork tucked safely in my lawyer's file cabinet, the signatures Ethan hadn't even read when he'd scribbled them months earlier. Inside, a fire burned hot, but on the outside, I remained cool. I pulled off my apron, folded it carefully, and set it on the counter. Then I slipped that envelope into my bag, not for him to see, not yet. "Good luck with that, Ethan," I said evenly. My voice was steady, almost amused. He wanted me broken, humiliated. Instead, I handed him indifference. He smirked, mistaking my calm for surrender. "That's it. No fight." I tilted my head, giving him the kind of smile that had always unnerved him. "Oh, there'll be a fight," I murmured. "Just not the kind you think." The customers pretended not to listen, but their eyes followed me as I walked out from behind the counter, my bag over my shoulder. Each step felt like walking away from the woman I had been the one who let him dismiss, belittle, and underestimate her. The bell above the cafe door jingled as I stepped into the crisp morning air. The city hummed around me, traffic horns, footsteps, distant conversations. But inside me, a new sound rose resolve. Ethan thought he'd just taken everything. What he didn't know was that he'd only set himself up for the fall of his life. And I was ready to let gravity do the rest. When Ethan and I first dreamed of opening the cafe, it felt like a fairy tale. We were newlyweds then, still drunk on love and caffeine, both convinced that building something together would make us unbreakable. We'd scribble business ideas on napkins during date nights, fantasize about latte art competitions, and tour neighborhoods like expectant parents looking for the perfect home. The day we found the small corner property, sunlight streaming through its dusty windows, we just knew. The floor was cracked tile, the walls painted a depressing beige, but to me, it shimmered with possibility. I remember gripping Ethan's hand, my heart pounding as I whispered, "This could be it." He smiled, then not the smug grin I'd later come to know, but the genuine kind full of hope and possibility. "Our dream," he said. "Together." And for a while it was. Those early months were grueling. We worked until our knuckles bled and our backs ached. We painted walls ourselves, strung up cheap Edison bulbs, scrubbed years of grime from the floor. On opening day, I baked pastries through the night while Ethan handled the espresso machine with nervous precision. When the first customer walked in, we looked at each other with wide eyes and matching grins like two kids about to jump off a diving board. The cafe quickly became more than a business. It was our story, written in steam and sugar. Regulars knew our names. Kids grew up on our hot chocolate. Every thank you, every smile, every packed Saturday morning rush felt like proof we'd built something real. But somewhere along the way, Ethan changed. At first, it was small things. He started taking business calls at odd hours, stepping outside with his phone pressed tight to his ear. When I'd ask who it was, he'd wave me off. "Suppliers, babe. Don't worry." Then came the dismissiveness. I'd bring up concerns about rising costs or suggest new pastry recipes, and he'd chuckle as if I were a child. "You're not good with the numbers," he'd say with that patronizing smile. "Leave the serious stuff to me." I told myself it was just stress. He was tired, overworked. Maybe I was too sensitive. But deep down, something sharp lodged in my chest each time he brushed me aside. The cracks widened when Sloane appeared. She was introduced as a consultant, though no one ever saw her do any actual consulting. Tall, polished with a smile that could cut glass, she began popping into the cafe more and more. Sometimes she lingered by the register, her laugh a little too loud, her hand grazing Ethan's arm as they talked. I'd ask about her later. "She's helping us expand." Ethan would reply, avoiding my eyes. "You wouldn't understand, it's financial strategy." But I did understand. I understood the way her perfume lingered in our office long after she left. I understood the sudden, unexplained expenses on our statements. I understood the way Ethan's lips curved into that same smug grin I'd first noticed when he told me I was fired. And I understood that the man who once held my hand in a dusty storefront was slowly vanishing. Still, I clung to the idea of us. We had built this cafe together. Surely that meant something. I tried to rekindle the spark, suggesting date nights, bringing him coffee during his supposed strategy sessions. Each time he brushed me off. Later, "Mia, I'm busy. Don't you have pastries to bake?" It hurt, but I swallowed it. I'd invested not just money, but my heart into this marriage, into our business. Walking away felt unthinkable. So I stayed. I stayed when he missed our anniversary dinner because of a supplier emergency. I stayed when he laughed at my suggestion to introduce vegan pastries. I stayed when Haley whispered, "Mia, is it just me? Or is Sloane here?" A lot. I stayed because I believed that if I left, I'd lose everything. Looking back, I realize how much of myself I sacrificed to keep the illusion alive. I carried the weight of the cafe scheduling shifts, managing payroll baking through the night, while Ethan strutted around calling himself the face of the business. And still part of me wanted to believe in him. I remembered the man who once whispered our dream. I held on to that memory like a lifeline, even as the truth unraveled in front of me. The real Ethan was no longer my partner. He was a man consumed by ego, enamored with control, and blind to the fact that his arrogance would be his undoing. The firing wasn't a spur-of-the-moment humiliation. It was the climax of years of belittling, dismissing, and betraying me. And though he thought he'd finally won, he didn't know that I'd been quietly, patiently preparing for this very moment. Because love may have made me blind once, but business had taught me to keep the receipts. And the most important receipt of all was signed in Ethan's own careless handwriting. The irony of it all is that Ethan gave me the weapon I'd eventually use against him. He placed it right into my hands, signed it without a second thought, and handed me control of the very empire he believed was his alone. It started with expansion. The cafe had done well enough those first 3 years that we began talking about opening a second location. Ethan loved the idea. Another corner, another neighborhood, another audience to charm. He pictured his name glowing in neon across the city harbor and hearth, stamped on to-go cups from uptown to downtown. I was more cautious. Expansion meant debt, new suppliers, more staff to manage, and higher stakes. But Ethan thrived on risk, and I wanted to believe in his vision. So we sat in the office one rainy afternoon with our accountant, Jules, a longtime friend who had guided us since day one. I recommend forming an LLC and restructuring ownership before you expand. Jules explained, adjusting her glasses. Right now, you're operating as a general partnership. That means if something goes wrong, you're both personally liable. An LLC protects you, but you'll need to decide who holds what percentage. Ethan waved a dismissive hand. 50-50. We're married, aren't we? Everything's equal. But Jules shook her head. Not exactly. For tax and legal purposes, it helps to have a managing member. One person ultimately responsible for signing off on decisions. Ethan barely listened. His phone buzzed, and he smirked at the screen before setting it down. Fine, whatever. Mia can handle that. She likes the boring paperwork. He said it like a joke, a dig at me, but I didn't flinch. I knew the power of paperwork. I'd been the one reading contracts line by line while he signed blindly, trusting his charm to carry him through. So I did what Jules suggested. The documents were drafted, the ownership divided 60% to me, 40% to Ethan. On paper, it was logical. I handled operations, finances, day-to-day management. Ethan was the face of the business, charming customers and suppliers. We played our roles. When the day came to sign, Ethan didn't even glance at the pages. He scribbled his name with a flourish, more interested in taking a call than reading the fine print. See? He said, sliding the papers back to Jules. Handled. I tucked the signed documents into a folder, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. He thought I was just managing details. He didn't realize he had just given me majority control of everything. For months, I didn't say a word. Why would I? The cafe ran smoothly. The second location slowly took shape, and Ethan was too busy parading around with Sloane to notice the shift in balance. I kept the secret like a loaded weapon, hidden but ready. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea flipping through the paperwork. The bold letters, Managing Member Mia Sullivan, stared back at me, steady and undeniable. My name, my ownership, my shield. I remember Jules's words when we signed, "Don't underestimate the power of clarity, Mia. If he ever tries to undermine you, this paper is your safeguard." Safeguard. At the time, I didn't think I'd need it. Now I clung to it like armor. Ethan, of course, grew bolder as time passed. He started holding strategy dinners without inviting me, arriving home late with the scent of whiskey and cologne clinging to him. He spoke less about our cafe and more about his vision. One night, as I folded laundry, he leaned against the doorway, swirling a glass of bourbon. "You know, Mia, you're great with pastries and all, but you really don't get the bigger picture. That's where I come in." I folded a towel carefully, ignoring the sting in his words. "Funny," I said lightly. "I thought we both came in." He chuckled. Don't take it personally. Some people are leaders, some people are support. Support. That word clanged in my head like a slammed door. I smiled, but inside I thought of the deed, the LLC papers, the controlling interest. Support. He had no idea I was the foundation holding everything upright. The second location opened with a modest ceremony. Ethan cut the ribbon while Sloan snapped photos for social media. I stayed in the background, shaking hands with staff, making sure the ovens actually worked, ensuring payroll had cleared. That night, while Ethan soaked up congratulations at a bar with business partners, I locked myself in the office and updated our legal files. Ownership 60% Mia Sullivan, 40% Ethan Sullivan. Power tilted quietly in my favor, a seesaw he didn't even know he was standing on. The night before he fired me, we had one of our rare dinners together at home. I made roasted chicken, his favorite once upon a time, though he barely touched it. He was scrolling through his phone again, grinning at messages, probably hers. "I think we should rebrand," he said suddenly. "Make Harbor and Hearth sleeker, trendier. Maybe even drop the and Hearth. Just Harbor." I set down my fork. That's not who we are. Our customers love the warmth, the hearth part. It's what makes us unique. He smirked, sipping his bourbon. "See, that's the problem. You think small. This is why I need to make the big decisions." I looked at him across the table, the man who had once whispered dreams with me in a dusty storefront. Now he looked like a stranger drunk on his own reflection. "Be careful, Ethan," I said quietly. He laughed. "Or what you'll bake me to death." I smiled, then the same smile I gave him the next morning when he fired me in front of everyone. The smile of a woman holding a card he didn't even know existed. Because the truth was simple, he thought he owned me, the business, the future. But I owned it all. After Ethan signed away majority ownership without realizing it, I thought maybe I could still salvage what was left of us. I told myself the papers were just insurance, a silent safety net, something I'd only use if things ever spiraled out of control. But spiraling has a way of happening quietly, slowly at first, until one day you wake up and realize the life you built is unrecognizable. It began with whispers. One Friday evening, as I was closing the register, Haley leaned in close. "Mia, do you know that Ethan's been telling suppliers to send invoices to a new email? It's not the cafe's one. It's his personal account." My stomach nodded. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her brow furrowed. "Marco mentioned it too. Said the last shipment was redirected. Something feels off." I forced a smile, thanked her, and waved her off. But inside dread curdled. That night, I stayed late after everyone left, pulling up bank statements. I combed through line after line of transactions, my finger tapping against the desk. That's when I saw it transfers to an unfamiliar account amounts that didn't match any supplier we used. The account name was Hearth Growth LLC. I froze. Hearth Growth. That wasn't us? Our company was Harbor and Hearth LLC. Why would there be another entity with such a similar name? I printed the statements, my hands trembling as the paper warmed beneath my fingers. When I confronted Ethan the next morning, he barely looked up from buttoning his shirt. "Hearth Growth," I asked, holding up the papers. His eyes flicked over the printouts, then back to his reflection in the mirror. "Oh, that. It's nothing. A side venture. Don't worry about it." "Don't worry about it?" My voice sharpened. "Money from our accounts is being funneled into this thing. You didn't think I'd notice?" He slipped on his watch, calm as ever. "You always overreact. It's called expansion. Sloan and I are setting up a new brand. You wouldn't understand." The casual way he said her name was a knife to the chest. Sloan. He finally turned, smirking. "She has vision. She sees the future. Unlike you clinging to pastries and cozy vibes." I clenched my fists, blood roaring in my ears. "You're stealing from us. From me. From the business we built together." His smirk widened. "Correction, the business I built. You're just the help." Those words burned hotter than any oven. Just the help. After years of sweating over ovens, balancing budgets, training staff, soothing angry customers, sacrificing sleep and sanity, I was just the help. I wanted to scream to throw the papers in his smug face. Instead, I swallowed my fury and tucked the statements back into my folder. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was powerless. But I had my weapon tucked away in a drawer, signed by his own hand. Over the next few weeks, his betrayal grew louder, more brazen. Sloan began showing up during staff meetings, offering advice no one asked for. "We should cut costs by switching to cheaper beans," she said once, flipping her glossy hair. Haley shot me a look across the table. Her nose wrinkled. Ethan clapped his hands. "Brilliant idea, Sloan. See, this is the kind of thinking Mia never has." I bit my tongue until it bled. Another time, he rearranged the schedule without telling me, leaving us understaffed during the busiest Saturday of the month. When I confronted him, he shrugged. "Adapt, Mia. Leaders adapt." What he didn't say, but what his smug smile screamed, was that he was setting me up to fail. And then came the night I overheard them. I'd left my scarf in the office after closing and went back to retrieve it. The door was ajar, light spilling onto the hallway. Inside, Ethan's voice drifted out low and conspiratorial. "She'll be out soon. Once the paperwork clears, it's all mine. Then we'll expand, and she'll be nothing but a memory." Sloane's laugh followed high and sharp. "You really think she won't fight? Fight! She doesn't have it in her. She's soft. Always has been." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. I stood frozen in the hallway, scarf forgotten in my hand, every word searing itself into my memory. They thought I was weak. They thought I was finished. But what they didn't know was that while they plotted my downfall, I had already secured my victory months ago. The morning Ethan fired me, it all snapped into place. His arrogance, Sloane's smirk, the whispers of Hearthgrowth LLC. It was all leading to this grand moment of humiliation. He wanted to strip me of everything in front of employees and customers, to watch me crumble while he declared himself king. But when he raised his voice and told me I was done here, I wasn't broken. I was ready. As I walked out of the cafe that day, the autumn wind crisp against my cheeks, I knew exactly what I had to do. Ethan thought the story ended with me fired, discarded, erased. But the truth? That was just the beginning of his unraveling. The morning Ethan fired me, I walked away from the cafe with my head held high, but the moment I turned the corner, the facade cracked. My chest tightened. My hands trembled around the strap of my bag, and the anger I'd swallowed back inside those walls threatened to spill over. For years, that cafe had been my life. The scent of roasting beans had been my perfume, the hiss of the steamer, my soundtrack, the cozy hum of customers, my heartbeat. And now, Ethan had tried to rip it all away with a smug declaration and a smirk. But as the autumn wind whipped through my hair, I gripped the slim envelope in my bag, my secret weapon, my shield, my revenge. The papers, the LLC agreement, the ownership he'd signed away without a second glance. I wasn't done. Far from it. I called Jules that afternoon. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and steady as ever. "Mia, I had a feeling I'd be hearing from you soon." I let out a shaky laugh. He fired me, Jules, in front of everyone, announced it like he was the CEO of the world. I could almost hear her rolling her eyes. That man's ego could fill a stadium. "But Mia, he can't fire you." I gripped the phone tighter. "He thinks he already did." "He thinks a lot of things, but the law doesn't bend to arrogance. You're the managing member. You hold 60%. Legally, he doesn't have a leg to stand on." Her certainty wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time all day, my pulse slowed. "What do I do?" I asked. First, Jules said, her voice brisk, "We notify the bank and freeze any suspicious transfers. Then, we alert your employees that any instructions coming from Ethan without your approval are invalid. Finally, we draft a cease and desist letter. If he wants a war, we'll give him one with paper and law on our side." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the papers spread out before me like a map of the battlefield. The documents glowed under the lamp, the bold letters proclaiming me managing member majority owner. I traced my finger over my own name. It was surreal how simple ink on paper could mean the difference between defeat and victory. Memories of Ethan's smug face at the cafe flickered in my mind, his words echoing, "You're fired. This is my company now." I whispered into the quiet, "No, Ethan. This is mine." The next day, Jules moved quickly. She filed notices with the bank, freezing the Hearthgrowth LLC account Ethan had been funneling money into. She drafted letters to our suppliers, clarifying the true ownership of Harbor and Hearth. And she prepared a formal cease and desist letter addressed to Ethan himself. By noon, the trap was set. I met Jules in her office, the smell of coffee lingering faintly in the air, a reminder of home, though in this moment, her office felt safer than the cafe ever had. She slid the letter across her desk. Here it is. Direct, firm, and impossible to misinterpret. He cannot sell, redirect, or represent the business in any way. Any further attempt constitutes fraud. The word fraud sent a shiver down my spine. Fraud, I repeated softly. Jules leaned back, her expression sharp. If he's been funneling money into that other LLC, then yes, he's already towing the line. And if the buyers or banks decide to press charges, he'll face consequences he can't charm his way out of. I exhaled slowly, a bitter satisfaction blooming in my chest. Good. That evening, I received the first call. Ethan's number flashed on my screen, but I let it ring out. Then came the texts. Ethan, what the hell is this letter? Ethan, you can't do this. Ethan, we're married. It's mine too. I typed, then deleted, then typed again. Finally, I settled on one simple reply. Me, read the documents you signed. His response was almost immediate. Ethan, you tricked me. I smiled at the screen, shaking my head. No, Ethan, you tricked yourself. The following days were a blur of strategic moves. Jules contacted employees directly, ensuring they knew the truth. I was still their boss, not Ethan. Relief washed over Haley's face when she read the memo, her text buzzing into my phone minutes later. Haley, I knew it. We're with you, Mia. Marco's response was more blunt. Marco, about time someone shut him up. The solidarity of my team gave me strength. For so long, I'd felt alone, isolated by Ethan's dismissiveness and manipulation. Now I saw clearly I wasn't fighting this battle by myself. And Ethan, he was cornered. A week after the firing, I sat in my apartment sipping tea as twilight painted the city outside. The phone buzzed again, another voicemail from Ethan. His tone had shifted from arrogant to desperate. Mia, listen, I overreacted, okay? We don't need to involve lawyers. Let's just talk, for old time's sake. I closed my eyes, listening to the tremor in his voice. For years, he'd wielded arrogance like a weapon, but now the cracks were showing. For old time's sake. The irony was bitter. The man who once told me I was just the help was now begging for a seat at the table. I deleted the voicemail. As I prepared for the confrontation I knew was coming, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Ethan thought he'd won when he fired me. He thought he'd stripped me of dignity, purpose, and power. But what he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment longer than he'd been plotting my downfall. And when the time came, I wouldn't just take back what was mine. I'd show him what real leadership looked like. The confrontation came on a chilly Saturday morning, the kind of day when Harbor and Hearth would normally hum with the comforting aroma of fresh pastries and chatter of regulars. But that morning, the cafe felt more like a courtroom than a community hub. Word had spread quickly. Employees stood behind the counter, their eyes flicking nervously between Ethan and me. Customers sipped their lattes slower than usual, sensing the undercurrent of tension, though most pretended to be immersed in their phones. And there he was, Ethan planted in my spot behind the register, jaw tight, posture stiff. He wore the same smirk he always used when he wanted to intimidate me. But today, it felt rehearsed, hollow. I stepped inside my heels, clicking against the tiled floor, the papers tucked firmly into the leather folder under my arm. Jules walked beside me, calm and deliberate like a general marching into battle. Look who decided to show up. Ethan sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. Guess you couldn't stay away from the empire I built. I stopped a few feet from him, taking in the staff gathered behind me, the customers pretending not to watch the weight of this moment pressing into my chest. Then I spoke, my voice clear and steady. You didn't build this empire, Ethan. We did. And legally, I own it. A hush fell across the cafe. Even the espresso machine seemed to quiet. Ethan's smirk faltered. What nonsense are you spouting now? Jules stepped forward, pulling the documents from her briefcase. Not nonsense, she said crisply. Facts. This is the Harbor and Hearth LLC agreement, signed by both you and Mia. Mia is the managing member and holds 60% ownership. That means she runs this business, not you. Gasps whispered from behind the counter. Haley's eyes widened. Marco muttered a quiet, damn. And one customer leaned forward, phone raised as if he might start recording. Ethan's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. You tricked me, he snapped, pointing at me like I was a criminal. You slipped that in with all the other paperwork. I didn't know what I was signing. I met his glare, my voice calm, but firm. No, Ethan. You didn't care what you were signing. You were too busy thinking about control, about appearances, about yourself. And now it's caught up with you. He slammed his palm on the counter. This is still my cafe. Everyone knows I've been the one running it. I've been the face of this place. I shook my head slowly. The face, maybe, but not the heart. Do you even know the names of our morning regulars? Do you know Haley's mom's birthday? Or how Marco trained for weeks to perfect his latte art? Do you remember why we started this cafe in the first place? Because I do. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ethan's eyes darted nervously toward the employees, his supposed supporters, but they looked past him toward me. Haley stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. Mia's the one who's always been there for us. You bark orders, Ethan, but Mia listens. She remembers. She cares. Marco crossed his arms, his tone sharper. She's the real boss. Always has been. The tide had turned. Ethan felt it too. I saw the panic flash in his eyes. You'll regret this, he growled, his voice low and venomous. You think these papers make you untouchable? I'll take this to court. I'll drag you through the mud. I'll ruin you. Jules slid another document across the counter with a cool smile. Already filed a cease and desist. The bank accounts have been frozen. If you keep funneling money into Hearthgrowth LLC, you'll be the one ruined. That's fraud, Ethan. And believe me, prosecutors won't hesitate to press charges. The cafe went still again. Ethan's jaw clenched, his bravado slipping like a mask in the rain. For a moment, he looked less like the powerful husband who had fired me a week ago and more like a man cornered by his own greed. I took a deep breath, my chest swelling with a mixture of relief and sorrow. I never wanted it to come to this, Ethan. I loved you. I believed in you. But you stopped believing in us a long time ago. And now, this cafe, this dream we built, it's mine to protect, not yours to destroy. For the first time, Ethan had no comeback, no cutting remark, no smirk, just silence. He glanced around, perhaps hoping for a shred of support, but all he found were eyes turned away or eyes staring coldly back. Finally, with a bitter laugh that sounded more like defeat, he muttered, "You'll regret this, Mia." Then he shoved past me the bell above the door, jingling as he stormed out into the cold morning. The door swung shut behind him, leaving only silence and then slowly applause. Haley clapped first, hesitant but hopeful. Then Marco joined in, and soon the whole cafe filled with the sound of hands slapping together, the rhythm of solidarity. Tears stung my eyes as I turned to them. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking. "This cafe isn't just mine. It's ours, and together we'll make it stronger than ever." That night, I sat alone in the quiet cafe after closing the lights dimmed, the tables wiped clean. The day had drained me, but it had also filled me with something I hadn't felt in months: hope. I ran my hand over the counter, the wood smooth and familiar beneath my palm. This place wasn't just a business. It was a part of me, a reflection of everything I had fought for. And now it was safe. For the first time since Ethan had fired me, I allowed myself to breathe. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Ethan wasn't the kind of man to walk away quietly. And when he came back, because I knew he would, I'd be ready. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Not the cafe Harbor and Hearth thrummed with more life than ever. Regulars streamed in offering hugs, congratulations, even flowers. Employees worked with a renewed sense of loyalty, their smiles genuine, their energy infectious. For the first time in months, the atmosphere matched the name we had chosen all those years ago: warmth, comfort, a safe harbor. But inside me, a different quiet lingered, a hollow echo where a marriage had once lived. I caught myself staring at the front door, sometimes half expecting Ethan to swagger back in, toss some cruel remark across the counter, or challenge me once more. But the days stretched on, and he didn't return. Not to the cafe, at least. He tried through lawyers, of course. Petty demands, threats of lawsuits, letters full of venom. But Jules dismantled them one by one, calmly and ruthlessly, until his case crumbled like stale bread. Eventually, even Ethan seemed to understand he had no fight left to win. One evening after closing, I sat alone with a steaming cup of chamomile tea. The cafe was hushed, the hum of refrigerators and faint creaks of the old building wrapping me in a cocoon of stillness. I thought about how far things had come. When Ethan fired me from my own family business, I thought my world had ended. I felt humiliated, discarded, powerless. But now, weeks later, I realized something I hadn't. Before losing him wasn't losing myself. It was reclaiming myself. I remembered his words the day he shoved me aside. "You're nothing without me." I let the phrase roll around in my head, testing its weight. It no longer stung. It no longer had power. Because I wasn't nothing. I was everything I needed to be. The following Saturday, we held a community night at the cafe. The employees pitched the idea an open mic evening for music, poetry, and stories. We strung fairy lights along the walls, pushed tables aside to make space for a small stage, and baked trays of cookies and pies. The place was packed. Strangers mingled like old friends, laughter rippled through the air, children danced near the front, and the scent of cinnamon filled every corner. At one point, Haley nudged me forward. "You should say something," she whispered. I hesitated, my throat tightening, but then I stepped onto the little stage. The crowd quieted, their faces turned toward me with warmth and expectation. "Hi, everyone," I began, my voice wavering just slightly. I want to thank you for standing with me, for believing in this cafe, for making Harbor and Hearth more than just a business. You've made it a family." Applause broke out, not polite, but wholehearted, and tears blurred my vision. Later that night, as I wiped down the counters after everyone left, Marco lingered by the door. "You did it, Mia," he said softly. "You saved this place." I smiled, exhausted but glowing. "No," I replied. "We saved it." He grinned, then slipped out into the night, leaving me alone again with the hum of the cafe. I leaned against the counter, letting the quiet settle around me. I thought of Ethan, his anger, his downfall, his absence, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear or bitterness, only closure. He had taken so much, but he hadn't taken me. Weeks later, on a rainy afternoon, I stood by the window, watching droplets race down the glass. A couple walked by under a shared umbrella, laughing as they tried to dodge puddles. I felt a pang of sadness, but also relief. I wasn't naive anymore. Love could sour, trust could shatter, but resilience, that was mine to keep. Harbor and Hearth stood as proof not of Ethan's power, but of my strength. I whispered to myself, "This is home." And to you, listening to my story right now, I hope you carry something from it too. Maybe you've been underestimated. Maybe someone tried to silence you, diminish you, make you feel small. Maybe you've had to fight to reclaim what was yours. If so, let my story be a reminder you are not powerless. You are not invisible. Sometimes the people who think they've broken you are only helping you discover how unbreakable you really are. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. If my story touched you, share it with someone who might need strength of their own. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories of resilience, betrayal, justice, and hope, subscribe, stay with me, and let's keep this circle of stories alive. Because every ending is also a beginning.